my first slide for Roping the Elephant, BI and Big Data Live. And really what we're going to talk about today is just kind of an introduction to what Hadoop is and what does it mean and what are some of these crazy words that we hear around Hadoop and Hive and Pig and, you know, all of these other things that we hear about. And so we're not going to spend a ton of time in slides. The goal is to give you a little bit of education, a little bit of background, a little bit of context for the rest of our discussion. And then I'm going to jump over and show you where Microsoft is making a big play in this particular space and actually walk you through sort of an end-to-end demo of being able to create a cluster in Hadoop, upload some data, work with that data, consume that data into the Microsoft BI stack, and actually build something that's usable and actually pretty exciting. So the best part is you guys can do and replicate every single thing I'm going to do today for free just by going out and participating in the Hadoop beta that Microsoft is running right now. So you guys will get all that information throughout the show today. Again, we're recording, so you can come back and check out the recording on pragmaticworks.com. I have no doubt you're going to want to check that recording out because a couple of the steps we're going to go through, we're going to have to go through maybe a little bit quicker. I've had to build a couple of things first just because they take 5 or 6 minutes to run, and so we want to make sure that we're just being sensitive to people's time. So first, what are Hadoop and Hive? And so there's more to Hadoop than just Hadoop and Hive. There's Pig, there's Mahout, there's R, there's all these other different tools, and we'll talk some more about that in a minute. But the two that we're going to focus on today are Hadoop and Hive, and that's where, especially if you're a BI developer or you're involved in data warehousing, these are the ones that are going to be the most important to you. So Hadoop is on the left, so it's our distributed file system. It's essentially allowing us to get a near linear scale on performance for batch type operations. And so remember, Hadoop is not a ultra low latency parallel data warehouse, solid state, crazy fast. It's not built for that. It's built to be able to take petabytes and petabytes of data and scale that query and that batch process out very, very evenly over a large number of nodes. And so today we're not going to be working with petabytes of data. We're going to be working with a smaller amount of data, but we're also only going to be working with a very small cluster. It's primarily geared toward unstructured data or data that would be difficult to get into a traditional data warehouse, whether that's because of its structure or whether that's because of the the volume of data that we're talking about. It just depends on what that file type or what that data type really is. But it's largely geared, I'll give you some good examples. So things like weblogs from GoDaddy.com. Their weblogs primarily would be a good candidate for something like Hadoop if they wanted to do analysis on those. That would be a great way to drop those in, do analysis on who's going to what pages and who's spending the most time on what pages and how they should relay out the site or make changes to optimize the end user experience. So that's a huge moneymaker for them. Obviously, a ton of data there to work with, and that's data that's not, certainly it could be modeled to be put in a data warehouse, but you're talking about loading terabytes and terabytes of data a day. A relational engine at some point is going to be time prohibitive to try to index and query all of that data once you're up in the multi petabyte range. And so Hadoop does a nice job of storing that data in a cost-effective way with the same capability to be able to scale it over a large number of nodes when you actually have to do something. It has tools with funny names, right? Hadoop is named after the creator's child's little play toy elephant, which is one of the reasons that we have elephant as a mascot. It's free. We also have other tool names that we'll talk about in a couple minutes. So next we have Hive. Hive is another program that will sit on top of Hadoop. So Hadoop will traditionally run, it's a file system, so it's going to run either on traditional Hadoop or on Linux or Unix. Microsoft's Hadoop is Hadoop on Azure, so it runs in the cloud, which we'll see in just a few minutes, and they're also working on on-premise solutions as well for that to run right on Windows Server. We have tables, metatables, we can do joins, indexes, views, many of the types of things we can do in SQL Server. Very easy to use, very similar syntax, and it's also free, and it's built into the Hadoop on Azure portal. So, the next thing I want to address is, really, why should you care? why is this important? So, when I started looking at this, I started thinking, I don't know. Is there really, is this really a market for this? I mean, the relational databases are growing so fast, and there's a lot of capability there. And, we started looking at the use cases about a year ago, and, we very quickly realized, there are use cases that, really do support this type of thing, and they're getting broader and broader and broader by the day. So, the one thing I want to encourage you is, don't walk behind the elephant. Jerry's about to figure this out. It can be a problem if you're caught behind the curve. So you want to try to at least get familiar with what can Hadoop and Hive and the associated tools do for you from a BI perspective. And so if we talk about that, what does this mean for BI? We've got all of these different things that we can connect via either the Hive Odbc driver. We also have a Hive add-in for Excel, which works really great. You're going to see both of those in action today. We'll talk a little bit about that. So we can take data and pull it into Excel, Power Pivot. We can use Power View, reporting services, SharePoint, analysis services, any of those sources. And and I have a slide at the very end that has a bunch of resources and links and things like that. So if you're out there, Googling and binging furiously trying to find some information on this, just chill out. Hang out with me for a little bit, and I promise I'll give you a slide with a ton of links and information on it. So, let's talk a little bit about how we leverage this, though. So, we've got Hadoop on Azure, which is Microsoft's Hadoop beta program that they're working on right now, and it's available for free. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. That's what we're going to do all our work in today. We've got the Azure VM role, so we can just use a regular Windows Azure VM. And we can install we can install it ourselves if we're really adventurous. We can use Amazon's EMR, Elastic MapReduce, and MapReduce is the type of query that we can run on Hadoop where data is first mapped out to where it's located, and those pairs, those key value pairs are then brought back. That's all done through the code that's actually written, and it's pretty powerful. We can also use it with things like parallel data warehouse or appliances where we have huge amounts of data in Hadoop, but we're going to be able to distill it down, but we still have a lot of data, so we can go from petabytes to terabytes. We may go down from 5 petabytes down to 20 to 80 terabytes every night and do an extract. And being able to take advantage of things that allow us to connect those different environments together is incredibly powerful. And all those things are out there. They exist. We've got Odbc drivers. We've got add-ins. And so, of course, we can leverage all the Microsoft tools, including things like SSIS, PowerShell, all those types of things as well. So on the right-hand side of your slide, we've got some tools that we'll talk about. We've got Pig. Pig is a scripting language that we can use. I'm not making that up. All of these names are real. This is not a typical Adam Jorgensen funny slide. This is for real. The extension to a Pig script file is .oink. I'm not making that up. I promise I will show you one of the files pretty soon as part of the demo. We've got Hive. We talked about Hive a little bit already. We've got R. R is a statistical and analytics language. So the only thing cooler than being able to store and manipulate much larger volumes of data is being able to actually do things like data mining and analytics and forecasting and all that kind of cool stuff on top of that data, right? That's what really makes it powerful. And R is what gives us a lot of that capability. So obviously we can pull the data out of Hadoop and put it into the Microsoft BI stack and do a lot of that the way we're traditionally used to. But we've also got new tools in Hadoop that allow us to do things on that side of the fence as well. So we have a good balance. We've also got a product called Zookeeper. Obviously there's a lot of animals running around in Hadoop. We have elephants, we have bees, we have pigs, we have all these different things, right? So we need a Zookeeper. So logically, what does Zookeeper do? Well, Zookeeper is going to keep things in line. Zookeeper is the job tracker. So every time you issue a query, it's essentially a job, and it's a batch job, and it's going to go out and it's going to map the data, and then it's going to reduce the data, and then it's going to return the information that you asked for. And Zookeeper keeps track of all that. It knows what nodes are doing what job and what threads are running and all that kind of good stuff. And you'll see a little bit of that as well. Of course, we've got the Hive add-in. We talked about that. That's going to allow you to connect from Excel directly to Hive tables in your Hadoop cluster, so you can pull data down directly from Excel into Excel tables. Very, very cool functionality. And then we've got this thing called a scoop connector. And a scoop connector allows us to connect from different systems and basically pull data from traditional Hadoop into a Windows environment as well. It's another way for us to connect up and be able to do sort of high-speed data transfer. So it's demo time. We're going to do a little environment tour. I'll show you some of that. I'll show you how to load some data into Hadoop. I'm going to show you how to create a table from that data so you can see kind of how that process works. We're going to consume that data, and then we'll use it to build something awesome. And I'll show you how all of that works. All right? So the very, very first step is we need to go over to HadoopOnAzure.com right here. HadoopOnAzure.com. And so when you have that and you go over there, the first thing that you're going to see is your ability to request a new cluster. Now, I've already requested my cluster today, and because it takes about 10 minutes or so to spin up, I couldn't do it live for you. So this is my one screenshotted portion of the demo, but very, very simple. You're going to pick a DNS name. It'll tell you if it's available, kind of like picking a domain. I just kept it simple, using my last name. And then I've got a login that I created, just a username and a password. It'll give you some guidelines over here when you're typing in the password. If you want to use SQL Azure or Windows Azure Data Services, depending upon when you took the screenshot, to store your metadata from Hive in, if you have a lot of metadata, you may want to do that. I don't need to worry about that right now, and it would have added complexity to my demo, so I said, we're just going to forget that for the time being. And I clicked Request Cluster. And that started spinning up. And I will flip over to my other screen and show you what arrives. All right. So you guys should be seeing my, it says Use Hadoop 1.0, and then I've got my interactive dashboard here. And so we're going to take a quick tour of this interactive dashboard. There's a number of different things that we can do right here from our sort of home page, right? To start with, we have this interactive console. Interactive console is going to give us the ability to run some interactive JavaScript commands to be able to upload files or create directories or manage our file system, whatever we want to do. We've also got a Hive Console. We can click on this button over here, and we can do some things in Hive. We can create new tables. We can run queries. We can do those types of things. I'm going to come back and show you some examples in this pane here. And we'll browse through some of these in just a minute. That's a critical part of our demo. We also can remote desktop into our actual cluster. So how do we do that? Well, we just click on our remote desktop, and I had already remoted in, so it's just going to go ahead and connect for me. And you'll notice over here we've got the ability to, let me close these and I'll show you how I got there. I can open up my name node, my web page here. This is all my information about the individual nodes in my cluster, their in service, what their IPs are. I can look at the logs. I can see all my storage directory, all that kind of good stuff. Then I can come over here to my MapReduce administration. Again, MapReduce are my batch jobs. So think of this like Zookeeper. And again, I can see which jobs are running. You'll notice if I scroll down, I've got some job history, and we'll go a little deeper into that here in a little bit once we actually run some jobs and do some stuff. So we've also got some ports here. These default to closed, so you're going to want to make sure you come in here, toggle them open. Odbc and FTPS, very, very important. Before you start doing any work, that's usually the first thing I do is to try to make sure that's open. We can come in here and configure some disaster recovery. We can import data directly from the Azure Data Market, by the way. Very, very cool. And we can integrate our Azure Blob Storage and our Amazon S3 accounts, so we can pull data in from those sources as well. Again, we have our job history right here in the portal. We've also got some samples. I like samples. These are all example programs that you can run that showcase, some of the things that Hadoop is good at. Major sorting and streaming and classification and clustering algorithms, and even just doing things like word count and distinct capabilities, as well as showing off how to use Scoop to connect data between SQL Azure and HDFS. So take a while when you get into this and just walk through the samples first. They're very self-explanatory. If you want, let's take a look at one of those really quick just so you have an idea of what you're getting into. You can actually click deploy to your cluster. It'll push all the files out exactly where they need to go. And then you can just read through the steps, and it's going to say go ahead and deploy the cluster, and then go ahead and run these things in the JavaScript console, and here's what it's going to do, and it's going to give you all the code and all the examples, very, very step by step. All right, so good thing to go check out. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we install the appropriate version of this Hive Odbc driver. So I've already done that. It's a next finish kind of install, very, very simple. But you're going to want to download the correct version whether you're on a 32-bit or 64-bit platform. If you're working with any sizable amount of data, of course, I would recommend really try to stick to that 64-bit version of the platform if at all possible. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a little tour around the interactive console, and then we're going to upload some data, and then we're going to do some things with that data. So the end goal, and what I'm trying to show you today, is we're going to go from taking some data that I've gotten as a developer or as a power user, uploading it, creating a table in Hive, and then using that table in Hive to create a interactive Power View report that's going to give us some really cool visualization to be able to get back to the user. And being that it's 11:20 and I want to finish a few minutes early for questions, I'm going to try to do all of this in 25 minutes, which is you guys should be able to recreate even on your lunch break. All right? So a couple key things here for those of you who are not Unix folks or Linux folks. I'm not totally self-admitted. I am not a Linux or Unix guy. I have some Mac OS scripting experience, which has helped me a little bit here, but nothing significant at all. There's a great how-to guide right over here in, I think it's in downloads. Yep, right here. That walks you through running a bunch of these demos and gives you some ideas on things you can run from the console. But I'm going to give you a few today that are going to be helpful. So the most important one to start with is help. And it's going to give you, kind of a list of all the different types of things we can do. So we can run a pig query. We can use, create, Hive files and Hive queries. We can run compiled jar files, which would be, a Java program that maybe is doing some MapReduce. We can parse data. We can parse data from Hive. We can do a number of those types of things. Now, let's say I didn't like that. I'm going to do something else. By the way, remember, everything needs parentheses because they're functions and it's JavaScript. So there's something I really, really like. So I really like the fact that I can type help. So I want to tell Microsoft that. So I can type feedback, help is great, put in more help. I need more help. And we can say send, and that'll go directly back into the dev team's log for feedback. So whenever you are, whatever you're doing, you can give feedback directly from the console. So let's take a look at what files we have right now. So I'm going to do an ls command. You'll notice I can't do a straight ls like I can in Linux or another distribution. So I want to be able to do a ~ls like in JavaScript here. So you'll notice I have a pig file sitting out here, .oink. I have a text file that's got some of DaVinci's journals. That's a sample text file from Microsoft that I'm using. I've got a sample weblog in here as well as just a directory called samples. So if I wanted to, I could create a new directory called demo, and that will show up here in just a minute. But in reality, I just want to upload another file. So I'm going to do a filesystem.put command. By the way, there's two ways to upload a file. I'm going to show you the other way in just a second. But this way works really, really well if you just need to upload one or two files. I can go over here to my source, and I'm just going to overwrite that DaVinci file. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And I'll leave it in my root, and I'm going to say upload. And it'll take it a second, crunch away. It's uploading my file. And in just a second, it'll come back and say upload complete. So while we're looking at that, the other way to upload a file is through secure FTP. So you'll notice here I've got a little PowerShell script, and it's using an FTP program called curl, pretty popular. The reason I like curl and the reason I like using PowerShell for this, even though I'm not a PowerShell expert, is when you do an FTPS, your password has to be an MD5 hash. Haha. So this will actually do it for you. So I've got my server name, my username, my password, my file that I want to upload, and the destination, and then a very simple hasher to create the password hash, and then just building the curl command here to do the FTP, and then invoking it. So very, very, very simple code here. It could probably be even simpler. I'm not an expert. This is taken off the some of the samples that are freely available. I just adapted it to work for my purposes. So you know, just keep that kind of thing in mind. So so we have a good question. It says, how do you move your big data set from SQL Server to Hadoop? So honestly, if you have a large data set and you think it's a good candidate for Hadoop, you're going to want to probably export that out as a series of flat files, move that over, and then potentially create Hive tables on top of that. You know, it just depends on the use case for what you're trying to do. And again, it depends on the types of queries you want to be able to run, because Hadoop is largely geared toward those batch queries. You know, so if you're looking for, you know, transactional type or reporting performance live off of Hadoop, that's usually not always the best case. Usually you can, you know, you're better off doing, you know, batch aggregate analysis type work on Hadoop and then surfacing that up to, you know, SQL Server or your database or analytics platform. So good question, though. So now that we've got our file uploaded, let's make sure it's there. So, okay, still there. We overwrote it, but it overwrote at the right time. So you'll notice my timestamp here different than my timestamp there, so we do know that it got overwritten, so that's good. So let's take a look at what's in that file. Let's see why it's so important. So another command, just to validate that the file is not corrupt, is a cat command. And cat is going to read this file out to the screen. All right, good. So my file looks pretty good. Obviously, this is all just to kind of validate what we're doing. So, you know, that looks pretty good. So basic functionality here. There's a lot more you can do in this JavaScript console. I'm not a Java developer, so I'm still getting my feet wet on that side of things as well. I just want to give you guys some ideas on how you can upload that data. Most important thing to be able to play around with this is, you know, just to be able to get data uploaded, right? So that's really, really important. Next, we have our Hive Console. And the Hive Console is going to do a number of things. So it's going to allow us to do things like show all of our tables. And it's going to evaluate that and send me back my two tables. So I've got a Hive sample table and a weblog table. And I can see my metadata right here. I can click that and it'll put it in my query for me. So if I wanted to, and you'll notice, so I'm going to say select star from Hive sample table, limit 200. Now you'll notice I didn't say top 200 star, I said limit 200. This is a little bit different syntax from your traditional SQL, but it's pretty close, and it doesn't take very long to pick up the basics. So I'm going to evaluate that. Let's see what we get back. We should get back just 200 rows from my Hive sample table, which is good. We'll just make sure that that data is there and that it's doing what we expect it to do. So. All right. Well, that came back pretty good, so I'm pretty happy with that. And we're going to use that data. That's data I uploaded a little bit earlier today. We're going to use that data when we go to do our demo. But just to give you an idea on how this process looks, the other data that we have is, whoops, sorry about that. The other data that I have is this weblog file that I've got here. It's got a bunch of weblog entries. And so what I'd like to do is create a database table based on that. Right? That's really what I'd like to try to go after. So I've got a Hive query here. I'm going to show you what it looks like. That I'm just creating an external table called weblog demo. I've got all my columns here. Very simple schema here, and I've got a comment. This is a weblog sample. Change that to demo. and store it as a text file, and I'm going to store it in this particular location. So I'm going to go ahead and evaluate it, and hopefully it's not going to conflict with the table I already have out there. It shouldn't. And then that's going to give us a table, another table that we can go see as, okay, so it looks good. So let's say select star from weblog demo, limit 100. And let's just make sure we've got some data in that table. And that way we'll know that we've uploaded our file. All right, good stuff. There's our data. So it took all my files that I had in there and created a table that's got a whole bunch of data in it. And that's exactly what I wanted it to do. So perfect. So now we've been able to look at the interactive console, upload some data, use that data to create a particular table, and then now we're going to use a couple of those tables to consume them, build some reports, and I'll show you how that works. Got a question in here. How has that mapped data from the log file to the Hive table? Yep, it's just column order. So, you know, a good idea is not to mix and match 16 different files in the same directory. So ideally I would have, you know, made that its own, you know, more involved subdirectory, but for time I just went ahead and left it there and moved it in. So obviously you can write those scripts a lot more involved and do a lot more with them. It's very, very, you know, feature rich. But for today's purposes, I'm just trying to keep it simple, since I know most of the folks out there are not very familiar with Hadoop. I'm just trying to make sure you guys have a demo that you can walk through and, you know, get the gist of it as you're building it as well alongside. All right. So now that we've got some data loaded, we uploaded our weblog file. By the way, if you're not experienced with PowerShell, let me bring that back up. There's a couple things you want to make sure you do. The one biggest one is, you know, look up on Bing, you know, something like running your first PowerShell script. It's going to give you a couple things you're going to want to do in your environment, like setting your execution policy and a couple of other things to make sure that, you know, your scripts will run and that you'll get the right error messages back and things like that. So just a good tip from somebody who's not a PowerShell guru and had to run into a couple of those things myself as I was getting started. So just some good friendly advice there. All right, so now we've got our cluster, we've got some data. So how do I go get the data? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage my new Odbc server, my new Odbc driver, and I'm going to come over here to my file DSN, and I'll come down here to my C drive, and I'm going to create a new file DSN. Now I've already done this, but I'll show you how to go ahead and do it again. It's very straightforward. I'm going to say add, and we've got a new type in here called Hive. The important note here, you want to say advanced. Sorry, this keeps popping up on the other screen. You want to not verify this connection, because from this console, from this dialog, it will not verify correctly, and it'll keep crashing your Odbc window. So you want to say, okay, don't verify it. I promise it's going to be okay. We'll say next. And I'm just going to put it back on my C drive, and I'm going to call it live demo .dsn. And say finish, and there it is. Now I'm going to say configure, and we'll do a description, and I'll call it live demo, and my server name is my cluster name right there. Very straightforward. And of course, for authentication, I've got my simple login here. By the way, even though this says it will not be saved in configuration, I have had some issues with including it or not including it. So anytime there's an authentication, I now do it anyway, because sometimes it seems like it saves and sometimes it seems like it doesn't. Remember, this is all beta, so you want to you know, just proceed with caution there. All right, so we've got our live demo. We've also got Hadoop. We can use either one of those, and now we're good to go. So next, in order to test this, we're going to come over here to good old friendly Power Pivot. Now we're straight into Microsoft BI technology. We're back in friendly spaces. Those of you that were having a little bit of a seizure because I was on a command line, welcome back. We're going to do from other sources to go get some data, and I'm going to go get some Odbc data. And now I've got to build a connection string. So let me say this is my Hadoop live demo. I'm going to build my connection string. Important good step here, don't start with the connection, go back to provider. We need to use our OLADB for our Odbc driver provider, and then we're going to build the connection string. I know this sounds really complicated, but it's actually not. We're going to go to, I stored mine on my C drive, so I'm going to go and I'll pick one of my DSNs here that I have created. And you'll notice again, I need my password. So no problem there. I'll go ahead and say OK. And in 1 second it'll pop in there. Looks good. And then this was where I had most of the problems. So if you don't still type this in, you're gonna get a blow up here. So make sure you put your authentication information in here, allow saving password, test your connection. It's going out, bam, test connection succeeded. Very, very cool. So we're gonna say OK. There's our provider. And again, typical Power Pivot stuff, right? So I'm going to select from a list of tables. I'm going to pull my Hive sample table, but I happen to know that in this table is some geographic, if I could spell, data usage for cell phones. So I'm going to go ahead and say finish. I want to bring in all the data. That's the important thing to me. Uh-oh. Oh, we got a password problem. That's not good. Now, here's the rub. I have to start over. So I'm going to do this quickly, so I apologize. Certainly somewhere I apparently fat-fingered a password, so I'm going to try this again one more time. We'll do our Odbc driver. Next, build our connection string. I'm going to take that one. I'm going to type my password carefully. Make sure that's right. Jorgensen.cloudout.net. That looks good. And type my password there. Test my connection. That looks good also. Test my connection there. That looks good. And let's try to preview it. If we can preview, we should be able to query. That would make sense to me. I have run into some weird things where, you know, I was sure I typed my password correctly. I've done it 2 or 3 times, and it would say no, and then on the 4th time it would work. So I'm not sure if it's just a beta thing. Certainly this time I'm sure I probably just fat-fingered it, but that looks like good data. So let's go ahead and say finish. And hopefully this one should run pretty smooth. And this was only going to bring in about 57,000 rows of data. Again, the goal here is not to overwhelm my machine here. It's just to show you how easy it is. Yeah, there we go, about 60,000 rows. How easy it is to get into this data, be able to use Hadoop as another data source to be able to do some cool things with, and leverage all of the things that come with it, right? So I've got the data in here. That's great. So now I've got my data. I could build a pivot chart. I could build tables. I could build reports. I could build Power View stuff using this as a tabular model source. So there's a number of things I could do here. The other thing I could do is if I didn't want to go into Power Pivot, or if I didn't have Power Pivot, I can just use this Hive add-in, which is another free download from Microsoft. And I can come in here and enter my cluster details again. Whoops. It would help if I put them in the right box. There we go. And I can authenticate again. And say OK. And it's going to go out and connect to my cluster. And then look how cool this is. So now I've got the ability to query any number of these tables, all of my tables that are in Hive. Most importantly to me, I want my query time, what market, device data, state, country, and the overall query time, right? And then I can do things like put filters in. I can build this query. So I can aggregate by state, for example. And I can order it by country. And I'm going to limit the rows to 500 rows, just to keep it simple. I don't have to. I could omit that. And for the demo I'm going to show you in just a minute, I did not omit it. The problem, I did omit it. I have no limit. What the challenge with that is, of course, there's a delay to pull that kind of data back, so I didn't want to put you guys through that delay. But the best part is it builds the Hive QL for you right here. So if I wanted to, I could take that and pull it out of Excel, come back over here to my interactive console, go to Hive, paste this in, and say, hey, let's test this out over here before we worry about mucking up my Excel document. That's pretty cool, right? I don't know how many of you have ever had to ruin an all pretty formatting in an Excel document by bringing the wrong data in, but I have certainly done it. So you want to try to avoid that if possible. So it's going to go ahead and run, and it's going to take a minute. As you notice, there's a reason this is not, whoops, expression not in group by. Oh, interesting. So it maybe built me a bad query. Let's see if Excel will run this. Nope, it doesn't like it. So see, probably not. Let's just go ahead and edit my query here, and I'll fix it. And let's execute that one more time. Now that'll come through. So obviously, still some little hiccups in the add-in, probably not handling aggregates appropriately. So that was a good one for us to find together. So it's going to take it a second. It's going out. It's bringing in all that data. And I limited it to 500 rows, so easily handled by Excel from a data volume perspective. And what I'll do is, as soon as I show you that we can successfully get this data in, I'm going to pop over to another workbook where I did a little bit of work this morning, but exactly the same kinds of things that we did here, only with the ability to do some additional visualization. So we'll run it over here at the same time. By the way, if we'd like, while we're doing this, we can go over here to our remote desktop, and I can take a look at my MapReduce jobs, and I can see what's currently running. And we can say, here's all the job counters, map tasks, here's all the counters, all of our performance data, and here's everything that MapReduce did. So we've got we actually would have a graph there, but IE is blocking it for me for some strange reason. I'm not sure why that is, but. And then if we pop back over to Excel, there's our data. So everything's come back. Nice and neat in a table, so we can summarize with pivot charts, do any kind of cool thing that we want to do there. But really the best thing that we can do is if we were to come over here to Excel 2013, we've got some additional features. So I've still got my Hive add-in here. Looks very much the same, right? Same data set that I just brought over, same exact data set. I just added one column, I think, for query time, which I didn't really need. And then we can come over and we can do things like insert a Power View chart. And because we have Excel 2013, I'm going to create a new Power View chart. By the way, You could do this exact same thing without Excel 2013. You just have to do it in SharePoint, of course, with Power View. But I could do things like geographic data use. And I can click on this, and I can say, you know what, this would be so much better if I switched it over to, let's say, a map or some other type of visualization that would just be so much easier to use. So obviously, data is not quite where we want it to be yet for a map, but pretty easy to fix. So I don't need any of these vertical multiples. We're going to get rid of those. Locations is definitely state. Query time should be the size. And color is probably device platform. That will make that easier. And let's get rid of the device make. And I can now add things like country, device model, and device make. So I can come in here and very, very quickly, I can zoom in to the US and see how we're performing based on all my data. I can get the value of all of that big data, all of that data I'm stored in Hadoop, and in 20 minutes, I'm already visualizing it here in Power View. I can come in here and say, I'd really just like to see that maybe the Android platform, right? And actually what I'd really like to see is only LG phones. So look at the query times I'm seeing from Android phones in Ohio in particular, right? So from an Android-only perspective, I'm seeing a lot of query and data use in Florida, Ohio, New York, and California. If we switch back to maybe just iPhones, for example, you'll notice which state is crushing the rest of us in data usage for the iPhone. Pretty obvious, right in their backyard, right there in California. So not a big shocker there. By the way, when you drop this data in, I didn't do anything specific to let this data work in Power View other than it'll prompt you and say, hey, would you like to have us automatically geocode this data, because it's looking at my data and it sees the fact that I have a state and a country, and so it's going to say, hey, I know how to lay this stuff out. I can do this. And so it's going to give you some really, really great capability. And again, we can do this in Excel 2013 in Power View. We can also do it in Power View in SharePoint 2010 with reporting services from SQL Server 2012. If you install that in the correct mode, you can do that as well. All you'll need to do is pull this data into a Power Pivot model and save it up either as a tabular model or a Power Pivot workbook, and you can consume it that way as well. So some very, very cool things that we can do. Again, like I promised, being able to deliver this very, very quickly, being able to put data out there, run some queries, and then bring this data back in and leverage it is really, really powerful. And obviously, I don't see people using this for self-service data push and things like that. But obviously, if you're going to take a little bit of data, like I did today, putting it in Power Pivot might make more sense or something like that. But as your company begins to look at how they're going to be able to leverage their data, being able to connect directly back to this Hadoop cluster, pull that data forward and use it in a very self-service way is incredibly powerful. Much more powerful than the BlackBerry data usage that we're seeing on this particular chart. And again, you'll notice it did this internationally. So we've got all of the capabilities around being able to see everybody, all the different all the different states and provinces, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of good capabilities around these tools. Hadoop is definitely and big data, quote-unquote big data, are becoming, very, very hot topics. So one of the things I promised you was some resources. So I know that this is really small, and so I'm going to leave this slide up while we do Q&A. That way, if it's, it'll be up on the screen for a little bit. You guys can pause the screen when you watch the replay. There's some great books, some great websites. This list is a compilation that Laura Rebelke from Microsoft has put together. She has pulled that together and put it up on her blog, and that's her blog address. Laura and I talk a lot about big data, so she wound up pulling this together and pushing it out for the community, so I graciously hijacked it and gave her a very nice blog credit in hopes that she's a great person to follow for these types of topics. All right? So with that, we'll do a little bit of Q&A, and we'll go there. Yes, just to confirm, it is Excel 2013. Yes, thank you, Alexander. I was looking for that design tab for just a minute. I thought it disappeared on me. I was wondering what happened. I've had some issues because I'm running 2010 and 2013 in 2 versions of Power Pivot and multiple drivers, and sometimes stuff just shows up and disappears. So Power View map in Excel 2012 SharePoint. No, so the map itself, that particular map control, is only in Excel 2013, but all of the other Power View visualizations are available in SQL Server 2012 with SharePoint. So even just creating regular Power View reports and that type of thing gives you a lot of flexibility and capability to be able to drive some very, very cool things. All right, so I'm going to leave this up here just for the close of the session, and thank you guys for coming out. Keep an eye on pragmaticworks.com, our free training. We're going to be doing more things around big data, more things around performance tuning, and of course, more great BI content as well. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for hanging out.